Hello and welcome to Unacademy. As part of your comprehensive news analysis, today we'll be discussing 8 very important articles out of the Hindu newspaper, International and Delhi edition. But before we begin, as always, a very important announcement. Finally, we have a date, which is that on July 1st, there will be a 10% increase in the subscription fees for Unacademy. And at 24,999, it is the least and the most affordable our subscription has been for 15 months. So if you have ever considered us for a guided program, this is the right time. You have a closing window, a narrowing window on 1st July. There will be an increase in this price by 10%. And on 24th and 25th June, we started our polity batch with Sarmat sir in the evening. And I hope that you're a part of that. If you aren't, this is your chance to learn polity from the expert himself. Let's move to the question which I gave you yesterday. So what we are going to do is we're going to discuss this question. Then I will also show who have answered it correctly. And thereafter we'll look at the topics we have to cover. Now the question which I gave you yesterday was related to the lunar rocks, which is the Chang'e 6 recently completed its mission of collecting rock samples from near side of the moon. This statement was incorrect because it was from the far side, and a lot of you were able to identify this. Most of you, what you've answered is either 2 or some of you answered D also, which is none of the statements are actually correct. Now some of you again have given D. Most of you have actually given the right answer, which is 2 only. I asked you to put in, and you can see your answers here. They put in the answer into the chat box. The same protocol will follow today also, but I'm showing the students who have got it correct, which is 2 only is the answer. The students who have answered D, you should understand one thing, that in the second statement, this is a correct statement, which is the successful mission makes China the 3rd country after US and USSR to collect lunar rocks. It is not saying from where. It is not saying from where. It is saying just collecting lunar rocks. It is not saying from far side or the near side. If it said collecting lunar rocks from the near side, then this statement would have become incorrect. Some of you have answered yourself also. Some of you have cross-referenced also and said that sir has not said. It is not specific to the area. So if it said near side, then China would be the 3rd. If it is third, then it would not be a nation itself. Rather, if it is far side, then it is the 1st. As a country collecting lunar rocks, it is the 3rd, because it is not specifying which side of the moon itself. So the students who have answered B, 2 only are totally correct. And today again I have 2 questions for you, rather easy, which we will discuss, and you are going to answer it in the chat box as done by a lot of you. Thank you for that, and I hope that this is something which is making you more and more engaged with the sessions and is useful for your preparation generally. Now with this, let's look at the topics we have to cover today. GS paper 3, 2 and 1 all covered properly. First we will discuss the concept of solar potential and rooftop solar program in that regard. Then we'll talk about something called geological heritage sites or non-cultural heritage sites, a very interesting article telling you the problems which are there in that regard. Then 3 and 4 are quite interesting. One from the archives, wherein the first vaccine, what is called the BCG vaccine of tuberculosis, was developed 100 years ago. It is referenced in the Hindu newspaper in 1924. On the other hand, we also have an article on TB cancer and its treatment through genomic sequencing, which is quite interesting. So these 2 articles go together. Then we'll talk about anti-poaching initiative which has started in South Africa. Then yesterday we discussed the water crisis in Maharashtra. Unfortunately, that is the reality that we're discussing, Delhi's water crisis now. And then 2 small topics, one related to the new laws coming in with regards to FIRs and the old CRPC going away. And last but not the least, a new safari which has opened in the Bannerghatta National Park, or what we call as the Botanical Park in that regard. So we are going to cover these 8 in the next hour or so, and in most of these topics I have given you practice questions which are either mains or prelims, but specifically I have given you 2 prelims questions today. So as always, the protocol is going to be, I will not discuss the answer here, we will discuss it tomorrow and you will write the answer into the chat box, and as you can see we will discuss who have got it correct. 2 only is the answer for yesterday's question. With this, let's start our discussion for today, which is the concept of how well has India tapped into its rooftop solar potential. Now, there are a lot of static issues which are related to it. A pure GS paper 3 can be an environment question, can be a science and technology question. We will discuss the static portions and then also understand what is the concept. Now, why are we discussing this? Because recently we have added the most, or we've increased our solar potential, which is called RTS, rooftop solar potential or capacity, by 2.99 gigawatts, and this is the highest year-on-year growth. And now in India till March 31st, total RTS, which is rooftop solar, is at 11.87 gigawatt, which is quite a big development vis-a-vis what we had in 2010 or 2015. Now, there are two things which you need to understand. What is a rooftop solar plant? And the second thing, what is called solar potential. The first thing we will discuss is the concept of solar potential. See, India being a country which is both in the temperate and the torrid zone itself, we are solar rich. When it comes to the radiation which we get from the sun itself, we have certain zones in India which can actually produce close to 6.6 kilowatt hour per meter square in a day, and that is quite well represented in this map. The red zones and the orange zones are the zones in which you have economic viability and also in energy viability of setting up a solar power plant, and the areas which are a little bit yellow and whitish, there it would not be economically viable. This means that in a given meter square of this state or of this area, you can see from 6.6 kilowatt hour to 4.6 kilowatt hour can be produced. That means we are quite rich. In certain countries only 1 kilowatt hour, but however 4.6 or 4.4 is not viable because the output will be very, very low. On the other hand, 6.6 is a very healthy range, and from Rajasthan to most western parts of India, that ways we have a good potential. And the total rooftop solar, please understand this point, rooftop solar potential of India, if all of it is tapped, then we get 796 gigawatt. We are right now at 11 gigawatt, and therefore there's a lot to be developed. Now, I've been saying this word rooftop. Let's try to understand what is a rooftop power plant or rooftop solar energy station. Now, I've used a GIF here so that you can also understand GIF, so that you understand how it works. See, when solar radiation falls on the solar panels, these are PV panels, semiconductor panels, they convert the solar radiation into DC electricity. When it is converted into DC electricity, it is then pushed into an inverter, because DC current, direct current is of no use to us. So it then is converted into AC through an inverter. Now, in the day, because there's a lot of abundance of light and the unit used is low, what happens is that this inverter sends the excess energy needed into the grid. So you need what is called as a smart grid, which can both supply and take electricity or electricity units from houses. So in the night, the grid gives it to the solar powered house. On the other hand, in the day, it can rather take the excess electricity, the surplus electricity, and supply it into the main grid. So the whole system is based on deficit and excess. In the morning or in the afternoon, you have a surplus, and that excess can be pushed into a smart grid. On the other hand, in the evening, when the demand goes up, it can pull and also in a way collate both together, which is the storage which has been done in the house itself with regards to batteries, and if there's a deficit in the night, it can also pull from the grid. Now, for something like this to work, you have two variations which can be there. The two variations is, one is a smart grid, one is a standalone system. What do you mean by standalone system is that there can be a case in which the grid does not exist. If the grid does not exist, the solar power is stored in localized batteries. On the other hand, if you are connected to a larger grid, there can be to and fro of electricity from the grid itself. So you can have a smart grid system, you can have a standalone system. That is totally based on where the location is. In remote parts, you would need a battery operated system. On the other hand, in, for example, city like Jaipur or Delhi, you can develop a smart grid also. You need smart meters for that, so that whatever you're taking and whatever you're pushing into the system, the units can be adjusted. So the bills also go a lot of what we call, get a lot of concessions in that sense. A lot of solar power houses today have negative bills because they are adding more to the grid than actually taking. So this is what is called as a rooftop solar power system, or a house which is equipped with RTS. The word RTS, now I hope is clear what it actually means. RTS is based on the idea that you can either store the electricity or you can send it into the grid in that regard. Now, based on this idea, India has a very big potential with regards to 796 gigawatt which can be produced through rooftop solar. Now the question is, has the government of India developed a certain scheme which tries to do it? What we have to understand is what is the current scenario, then we'll try to understand what is the government doing and how can we actually remove the problems which are there. Now that ways we have a very important scheme which is called the Jawaharlal Nehru National Solar Mission. Now initially when it was launched in 2010, the idea was that we will produce 20 gigawatts of electricity, and that would be done in 3 phases: 2010 to 13, 13 to 17, 17 to 2022. However, in 2015, with the change in mandate in the government, we revised the target from 20 gigawatt to 100 gigawatt, and out of that 100, 40% was going to be generated through RTS. And though we have not met this target of 2022 and has been shifted to 2026, the idea is there's a lot of good development. We have at least met 11 gigawatt of this 40 gigawatt. Now, it is believed that if we actually have to meet the 100 gigawatt and thereafter another revised nationally determined goal which we have given to the UNFCCC of 500 gigawatt of renewable energy, that too specifically 280 out of solar, India has to produce by 2030 100 gigawatts of RTS, meaning most of the houses in India need to have this. If India has to meet its nationally determined goal in the UNFCCC, which is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, it has to produce 100 gigawatts vis-a-vis the 11 gigawatts which is producing. So 10 times more than what it is. Now, the key to meeting 100 gigawatt is every state realizing its potential in this map, which is there is in most of mainland India a potentiality to produce a lot of RTS based electricity, specifically Rajasthan, which has the highest in that sense. Now, what has been the state's performance with regards to adding RTS, because there's an investment which goes into this? Gujarat is the best performing with regards to 3,456 megawatts being produced today as RTS. Maharashtra second, 2,000. Ironically, the state which has the highest RTS potential is not producing even close to what, no, not even half, 1/3 of what it can actually produce. And more than that, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka are producing not a very big number, which is 600, 500 and 594 megawatt. This can go up till 1,000, at least 1,500 megawatt. But the problem is Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and Jharkhand are yet to even properly establish a protocol through which RTS can be established across the states. So when it comes to state performance, we have good performing states, we have average, and we have some who have not even tapped into the potentiality. Now, for this, the government of India started a scheme. And that scheme is called Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana. Now, under this, what was being done is that through subsidies and through incentivization, the idea was that 1 crore households in these states where the potentiality has not been tapped or even explored, RTS systems would be established so that they can generate 300 units of free electricity every month, which is quite a lot. 300 units is more than enough for a small household that ways, and if we are able to implement this scheme properly, 20 gigawatt we can produce out of the scheme itself. So we are at 11 gigawatt and we can make it 31 gigawatt to meet that 40 gigawatt just by implementing this system properly or this yojana properly. Now, what I've established till this point is a very simple thing, what is an RTS, what is the concept of RTS potential, and over and above that, has the government tried to do something? We have the Jawaharlal Nehru Solar Mission, that's a separate issue altogether. However, this is a scheme which has to be implemented properly. Now, in that context, there are two questions which arise, which is what is the problem, which is what are the bottlenecks, what are the issues, and how do we make sure that we do meet the RTS potential of this country and make sure that at least 40 gigawatts of rooftop solar can be produced. Now, here we have a plethora of issues. And this is what is extremely important for you in the examination, problems and their way forwards. That is what the UPSC always asks as a question. So, first is the issues with the Yojana is generally the way they are implemented. There's a lot of red tapeism, which is there's a lot of bureaucratic hurdles. We have multiple approvals need to be taken, money is released very slowly, and because RTS systems are expensive, you have to subsidize first. It can't be that a person installs the system and then you give subsidy later. You have to subsidize the system first rather than actually doing it later. Then second is inadequate infrastructure. This is the larger and the bigger issue. See, I told you there are two systems. You can have a smart grid system and you can have a standalone system. Now the problem is the best system is smart grid, wherein smart meters can be used and excess electricity can be sent into the grid, and if not used, it can remain within the system somehow. A smart grid that way is better. However, we do not have the infrastructure to actually either retrofit or have the meters in smart grids. So therefore, we have standalone systems. Now in standalone system, the problem is there's a specific capacity to which you can save or you can store. And that is based on the batteries which are there. And battery technology itself is limiting as of right now, which is that it cannot hold more than 100 megawatt or 200 megawatt. That to every household, 300 units cannot be held in the house itself, and therefore either they're wasting the potential or just the batteries are charging and it is used in the night in that regard. So the infrastructure for smart grids needs to be there so that we can actually use it as a very good system. It can become a supply chain in that regard. If there is excess somewhere and deficit somewhere, the houses which are producing in excess can be transferred to the deficit sector rather than keeping it in batteries and then wasting that solar potential. They have to what we call as close the solar panels after a point because the batteries are filled. And battery technology, be it lithium ion, be it lead batteries, there's a point till which you can save. That is one of the biggest issues with renewable energy and even EVs today, that batteries in themselves are quite sensitive to temperature, to humidity, and the fact that they have a limited capacity to hold. So it has to be a smart grid, and therefore inadequate infrastructure is another issue which we are facing. Then we have two things which go together. First is, in some places there is viability of producing solar power plant or having RTS in that regard, but there's no economic viability, which is that there's a village which gets a lot of solar energy, but it is so far away from the mainland or from the city itself that even if I produce a lot of solar electricity, the transfer of electricity, because there's a lot of loss whilst sending it through the grid itself, it is not economically viable. And the setting up of the solar power plant or the RTS system may be very expensive, and it's not worth the hassle of producing this whole system in that regard. So economic viability is mostly mitigated through governmental action and subsidies, and therefore economic viability is important. And last but not the least is, most of us don't even know about smart grids, standalone systems or RTS, which is that a lot of us having standalone houses, we have a lot of solar potential, but either the household, either the lead, what we call as the household members, are not aware that they can use this system to, in a way, produce electricity. And because the initial cost of establishment is more, people tend to think, what's the point of putting a 50, 60,000, 70,000 system? This is not the bill I give in at least 2 to 3 years. They don't understand the long-term vision here. They just think that it's an investment and it's just some technology being pushed in. So the awareness aspect comes in, that you have to tell them what is the advantage of this system over a long period of time. Now, we've identified the issues. Then what is the way forward? Because that's what is really matters to us, and you have to write it in the conclusion. This is very, very important to us. Now, what do you write in way forward? Very simple. First is awareness. This is something which is quite obvious. We have to tell the people. We have to create awareness amongst the people that smart grids, or be it RTS, can be a revolutionary technology which can change not just theirs, but their further generations' future. We have to talk. We have to tell them about climate change. We have to explain to them what is the potentiality of this, why is it so important, and over and above that, awareness allows us to create a certain, what we call as, dialogue within civil society, which can allow for a better implementation of this, even if the government is doing. However, we also need to do more on the part of the government. We have to do more research and development in battery technologies, in better solar panels, more thinner solar panels. What we call as installation can be more easier. You don't need a lot of equipment. So R&D is needed. The government needs to invest. The private sector is doing it, but it is very, very expensive. So the government has to do research and development in this sector. Further, storage of electricity and batteries is something where further R&D is needed, because you have the Elon Musk based gigafactories in that regard, but that is a very expensive battery. For India, we need cost effective batteries which have big potential and have a big storage capacity, but are cheap, because if it is not cheap, if it is not affordable, people will not adopt it. Second, or rather third, is something called the concept of, we need smart grid in smart cities. Meaning, if we are developing any city as of right now under the smart cities program, we have to make sure that smart grids are installed, so that we have the infrastructure in place for even future implementation of this concept. Because if we are producing standalone systems, that is not the future. Smart grids are the future, not standalone systems. So you have to make sure that there's a political mandate for something like this, wherein smart grids are there. And within smart grids, you need smart meters. And recently, smart meters implementation was stopped in Maharashtra with regards to the cost itself, and a lot of people had a lot of apprehensions with regards to it. Therein lies the awareness part. We have to tell them why are the smart meters being installed. So that way, is Maharashtra and Gujarat implementation is going on, but there is lack of awareness, which leads to a little bit of confusion amongst the people. So awareness, research development, battery technology, smart grid, smart meters are very, very important that ways for the development and taking all of this forward. Now, how can UPSC ask you a question? This is again something we have been doing for the past 3 to 4 sessions, which is mains practice questions. I hope you are practicing these at home, so that you can actually understand the nitty-gritty of writing, answer writing, and mains answer writing. This is make and break. This is where you get the marks for your rank in that regard. So mains is the main game. The key to India's energy security lies in tapping into its rooftop solar energy potential. Do you agree? Now, this is basically in a way quoted from the article itself. This is how newspaper articles become important. As always, because a lot of you had requested that I should give you the structure also. Remember, here you can talk about the recent development that we've added the most amount of rooftop RTS systems in this fiscal that ways, in this year in that regard. That is quite important. In body, you have to talk about the potentiality, what is RTS, and then you can talk about the state's performance, but the roadblocks. And in the conclusion, you can give the way forward, therefore giving you a very comprehensive answer, fetching you the maximum amount of marks out of that 10 marks to at least be 6 or 5, and your job is done with regards to this type of a question. With this, let's move to read the rocks to improve India's geological literacy. This is a very interesting article because it's a plea. It's a plea from a professor of geology from Bangalore, and he has actually identified quite a lot of things in this article, and it's quite important. See, let's first try to understand why are geological sites important and what is the concept of a geological site. See, when we talk about our heritage, we have two types of heritage. Heritage is anything which is our cultural expression or non-cultural expression. It is something which is in the past. Now you can have cultural or non-cultural heritage sites. Now what do you mean by cultural? See, cultural heritage site, an example, for example, could be the Taj Mahal, could be the monuments of the Mughals or the temples which are there in India. Further, you can have the intangible forms of heritages, tangible forms of heritages, but here it's more about tangible forms. So from the Mahabodhi temple to the sacred assemblies of Hoysala to the concept of Shantiniketan to the Chhatrapati Shivaji terminus, all of these are called cultural heritages as documented and recognized under UNESCO tangible heritage list. Now cultural heritage, what is it? This is actually, see, we as humans are evolving, and as humans evolve, they leave an imprint on the earth, and we as humans culturally produce civilization, or what is culture is the human expression in any form. So these cultural sites, what they do is they capture our culture, civilization, or human expression. That expression could be of art, could be of aesthetics, could be of anything which is human. So for example, the Mahabodhi temple or for example the Hoysala temples, they capture an aesthetic sense, the Vesara style, they capture an art culture, they capture a culture of Central India, they capture a certain cultural aspect of our existence. As we evolve, they get imprinted in this form. So human expression is culture. Culture, if it becomes bigger, is civilization, and this civilizational expression comes in the form of cultural sites. And we are that ways, and UNESCO that ways is quite sensitive to conservation, though it is not that we have not lost culture vis-a-vis, for example, the Bamiyan Buddha was lost to the Taliban in that regard. On day-to-day basis, there are multiple vulnerabilities and issues with regards to protecting culture, both tangible and intangible. Now, the focus of this article is not here, which is cultural sites. He argues that there are something called non-cultural heritage sites. Non-cultural heritage sites, ironically, do not capture human expression, but if you know your geography, you would know that the earth is also evolving. After the Big Bang, the universe, the galaxy, the Milky Way, the earth itself, our solar system, everything is evolving, everything is changing. Now the evolution of the earth, where is it captured? And there has to be, and there will always be some form of expression which comes out of the earth's evolutionary process, and that process is captured in what are called as geological heritage sites. A very good example of this, for example, is Lonar Lake, which is a lake which represents an impact of a meteorite, and therefore it represents a moment in the history of this earth. This is about the history of us. This is the history of this planet, wherein geological heritage sites, which are called non-cultural heritage sites, are capturing multiple geological, topographical, geomorphological, and even landforms which are quite rare but are giving us what we call as insight into the evolution of the earth and its history. And therefore geological heritage sites are quite critical to understand how did the earth evolve. So cultural sites, from prehistoric paintings to the seven wonders of the world, they capture how humans have evolved. The geological heritage sites capture how the earth has evolved. Now in that context, the Geological Survey of India has identified close to 34 different sites, and this was in the news also, with Bannerghatta being the newest addition in Telangana with regards to that. There are 34 sites in India which are geo-heritage sites of India, which basically capture different geological processes in the Indian subcontinent, in India itself, and that ways represent a moment of cultural heritage, but not of the earth, not of us, but of the earth, which is earth's heritage and evolution captured in these moments. Now that way geological heritage is quite important, because it is also an expression, it is also, and that way under UNESCO tangible, there are two categories. One is called cultural, the other one is called natural, the other one is, and the third is called mixed. And these are basically the sites which go into the natural ones, which are, or either mixed ones. That was quite important. So this is a map which basically gives you the location of all these geological heritage sites. Now once I've established to you what is a geological heritage, now comes the question, what is the author trying to talk about? He says the problem in India is twofold. Firstly, in this age of whatever you want to call of expression through Instagram and all, there is very low geological literacy, which is most of us don't know what a geological heritage site means, and we may be living close to it, we would have never explored it. So the first issue which he points out is that when it comes to geological literacy, it is very low, very low, abysmal that ways. People have no idea about geo-heritage in that regard. They don't know the difference between a cultural and a non-cultural heritage site in that sense. First is the awareness is non-existent. Second, what he argues is that unlike cultural heritage where there are multiple acts and the ASI has a lot of power that ways, there is no conservation or preservation of geological heritage sites, and a lot of important sites have been lost to either development activities and at the same point of time to mining. He argues that mining is one of the biggest issues for geological heritages. Because of mining, we lose on an average at least 5 to 6 sites in a year, or at least in the whole cycle in a decade, at least 2 to 3 very important geological heritage sites are destroyed because of mining. So it could be a fossil site, it could be a site of geological formation, lost. And therefore no conservation and no form of geological literacy in India as of right now. Now the argument he gives is, when it comes to institutional support, again somehow there is a certain form of surrogate behavior which geological heritage sites see. Because in 1991, UNESCO had organized a conference on the concept of geological heritage, and in that there was a concept of a geopark or geological park which was established. So there's a mandate which came in that how we have national parks, how we have what we call heritage parks, we can have geoparks, which is geological parks in that regard. And in that mandate, all the member nations to which India was also a part of, the argument was that either you make a geopark into a national park, which is a protected area, or you create a specific zone called geopark with the same type of safeguards. Now the problem is that though the US, the UK, Canada and a lot of other European countries followed the protocols which was talked about in 1991 with regards to national parks and geoparks, India did not legislate on this. India, there is no law which protects geological sites, and there is no authority other than the GSI, which is Geological Survey of India, that can actually protect the geological sites, 34 of them. And more than that, the GSI does not have the power to preserve and conserve, rather it just has the power to overlook. And therefore, what he's arguing for is that there's a need to relook, because we don't have a mandate. We have somehow taken the geological sites for granted, but they're quite important in the larger cultural history of the earth and of the Indian subcontinent. Therefore, what is the way forward and what is the argument which he has made? How do we make sure that geological literacy comes through? First thing is very straightforward, that you need awareness. That is something which we've talking about in the past 3 articles, which is awareness. And we need awareness at the school level, we need awareness at the secondary level, we need it at the higher secondary level, wherein students, children understand what is the difference, what is the importance of a geological heritage, and we need to integrate it into the syllabus. But at the same point of time, he says, at the governmental level, an inventory of sites is needed. The map which I showed you is not even half of what actually India has with regards to geological heritage. We need an inventory of sites where we need to survey and identify all geological heritage sites where the geological processes of the earth have been captured. Second, he argues that we need an act. We need legislation which gives a lot of authority to at least the GSI, or he says you create a new national Geoconservation Authority. He says through the act create a national geological or geoconservation authority and give it the power to conserve and preserve the way the ASI has power to conserve and preserve. And therefore, this is where the answer to the question comes in. How do we move forward? The way we move forward is by actually creating an inventory, legislating on it, and being serious about this issue. Somehow he argues that we are extremely non-serious for, I don't know if you've seen this map previously also. If you have, because we are preparing for UPSC, we are cognizant about this. But for a layman, these sites are actually useless. And one of them, which is the Varkala cliff section, has recently been destroyed because of certain sand mining in this section. And therefore, all of them are vulnerable when it comes to their existence in the Indian subcontinent to development and mining activities. And I hope that this will be created in the next maybe 5 to 6 years. There has to be a political mandate. Twice there was a bill which came in the Rajya Sabha, was shelved. There was a select committee which was established. Again, no real mandate. The parliament has not shown a lot of political will with regards to protecting the geological heritage, because they themselves may not be aware about the importance of this. So let's make this a point that we talk about geological heritages, and for you this is the question which will come in the examination, which is important. I've just quoted what he's argued. Geo-heritage sites are educational spaces where people acquire much needed geological literacy. Elucidate. So you have to talk about the importance of geological heritage sites. Quite interesting that ways. I hope you will answer this question. After this, let's move to 2 things which are together related and somehow quite well established that ways. So there is, from the archives, there is a 27th June article, 1924, exactly 100 years ago. There was a article which talked about a professor called Professor Calmette, and he is from the Pasteur Institute, and he was at that time testing a vaccine, preventive vaccine for tuberculosis and bacilli, and therefore the clinical trials were being talked about, that it has been checked on animals, 270 newborn children have been given, and it is showing a lot of good development and symptoms in that regard. And therefore preventive vaccine for tuberculi is something which was quoted 100 years ago. Ironically, if you will open up BCG, Bacilli Clement-Guerin, is a vaccine for TB disease. And ironically, this is the same professor we are talking about. So today the BCG vaccine is actually named after the same person who we are talking about. This is the from the archives issue. Now this creates a context for the article which came in the science section, which is multi-omics is transforming how India spots and treats TB and cancer. So somehow TB 100 years on remains a problem, with BCG also there. Still TB has become a bigger problem. Mycobacterium tuberculosis has been a problem because of its evolving nature. And now comes the what we call as recent aspect or the new developments with regards to this, wherein what matters to us is what are we doing today to treat TB. And therein lies genomics or genomic sequencing. We have previously discussed this also on this platform, wherein what is genomic sequencing. But just to refresh your memory, the word genome is basically the word which is used for genes. It is the genetic blueprint of an organism, both a bacteria or an organism which has a DNA. For us, for example, we have genomes, wherein it's a blueprint of an organism, has all the information to maintain, build, and replicate specific species. For example, our genomic sequencing that ways will allow us to reproduce and go forward as a species. Genome that way is a word which comes out of gene, but gene is used for hereditary purposes, or the concept of hereditary studies is related to gene. The word genome actually says that in our body there will be multiple what we call as mitochondrial DNA. We will have DNA which is in different parts of the body, all taken together we create a sequence that is called genomic sequencing. Now please do understand one thing, that genomic sequencing is basically a way of putting all of this information into data, which is genomic sequencing method. What it tries to do is it takes the entire DNA sequence, specifically the A, T, C and G, which is out of which the A, T, C and G together basically make the DNA itself, and they are put into a specific order and a sequence is created. Basically the whole concept is that you try to create a data set through which I can identify the species, I can identify the characteristics, I can identify anything. So you take the gene, break it up into the A, C and G and T, and thereafter put them in different what we call as sections, and then sequence it to put it into a data set, which is quite important. It is believed that one person, if my genomic sequencing is done, I would produce close to 5 GB of data for just the basic genetic sequencing. The whole set will be 90 GB. So 90 GB of data can be taken out from my DNA to give me the basic genes 5 GB and the whole sequence close to 90 GBs. Now genomic sequencing is the new what we call as new horizon in the healthcare sector, and close to 10,000 genomes of 99 different ethnic groups have been sequenced in India via the Department of Biotechnology. And that way what they're trying to do is they're trying to understand what is the genetic makeup of every Indian. So they're taking different ethnic groups because there could be small differences between the sequencing or the genes itself, and therefore we are trying to create a data set where we understand that if I am from a specific ethnicity or race, what is the sequence I have, do I have vulnerabilities to something, and do I have potentialities to develop certain diseases. Now one important thing which you need to understand is there is difference between genetics and genomics. Genetics is the study of hereditary. It is a study of single genes, which basically is the concept of how you and me inherit things. For example, you would have done this in your 9th and 10th class, which is the concept of TT, or the tall short represented like this. The whole Mendel theory is basically based on genetics, the concept of how I will get a certain feature from my mother and father. On the other hand, genomics is not the study of genes, it is the information in that gene which is actually kept together. It is the complete set of genetic information. It's not just the Mendel's theory of genetics or how I will inherit, what I've inherited, how it is sequenced. So basically genetics is basically looking towards a building and looking at the building generally. So when you look at the whole building, it is genetics. But when I go in and see the beams, the structures, and how the whole building has been created, the blueprint of that building, that is genomics. Genomics that way is coding of all forms of DNA in the body and is a very important concept which is emerging in India. So I hope that I've successfully established to you what is the difference between genomics, genetics, genetic sequencing, and the concept of genome. Genome is the starting point. It is the blueprint of every man and woman on the earth itself. Thereafter, you sequence it to create a data set which has all the information which is there in my body. It gives me the vulnerabilities and the potentialities of my body. And further, if I do it for different ethnicities and if I have similarities, I can create a data set. Genetics is the understanding of what we call heredity. This is related to sequencing. Now, in cancer, in tuberculosis research, and in rare genetic disorder, genomic sequencing is changing the landscape. Now, there were 3 organizations and programs which were quoted within this article. The Indian Tuberculosis Genomic Surveillance Consortium, the Mission for Pediatric Rare Genetic Disorders, and the Indian Cancer Genome Consortium. Basically, now for you, these 3 organizations become important because they are very closely related to the what we call as IndiaGen. IndiGen is a project which the Indian government is running through the Department of Biotechnology, through which we are trying to understand the genomes of the Indians, the ethnicity and the race of Indians, and further we are trying to create a biological profile through which we can prevent diseases and find vaccines further more quickly. Now, individually they are doing something, and that is what is important for us. For example, the Indian Tuberculosis Genomic Surveillance Consortium, what it is doing, because TB still is a very, very dangerous disease for India, and close to 4 lakh people lose their life to TB, and it can be pulmonary, which is based on your lungs, but can also be non-pulmonary. The idea is that TB, what they're doing is they are doing not the genomic sequencing of people, they're doing the genomic sequencing of the bacteria itself. Of the bacteria, wherein they're trying to understand how it is evolving, and the idea that you have MDR TB, which is multi-drug resistant, XDR TB, which is what we call extreme multi-resistant TB in that regard. In both cases, we are trying to understand how the Mycobacterium tuberculosis with the bacteria itself is evolving, and therefore they are trying to understand how can we prevent TB through sequencing the TB bacteria itself, and therefore this could be a new path-breaking discovery, and we've discussed this previously also. A lot of research is going into looking at the sequence, the DNA of the bacteria, therefore establishing newer ways to diagnose and treat it. On the other hand, the Mission on Pediatric Rare Genetic Disorders is trying to understand what are called prenatal, or what we call as post-birth. This is pre-birth genetic disorders which are rare. So for example, Parkinson's disease, you have multiple syndromes which develop through your life because of genetic sequencing, or what are called as mutations. Mutations which happen either in your gene or you've inherited it from your parents. They are trying to understand detection through genomic sequencing, and they're trying to understand how this detection could lead to early treatment, and therefore the PRAGED, which is Mission for Pediatric Rare Genetic Disorders, it is trying to check in children how we can create a certain runway or a pathway in which we can spot these diseases quickly, and that too at the prenatal before birth level or even just after birth. There is a certain treatment cycle which is created. On the other hand, the Indian Cancer Genomics Consortium is again understanding through genomic sequencing the concept of mutations, and the idea that somehow certain mutations in our genes can make us vulnerable. It was believed that cancer is mostly caused by environmental factors, but now it has been believed that there are certain mutations in the body which make it vulnerable to cancer or a susceptibility to cancer itself. And therefore, mutations and genomic sequencing are going together. Now, whilst all of this is happening, a very important point which is made by the article is the biggest issue is data. The biggest issue is data. In all three researches, in all of this genomics, it is data which has to be processed. So the first issue which we are facing is the concept of big data. The concept of big data, a new word which came through, which is terabytes of data which has to be sequenced and understood. In that case, AI and ML, which is artificial intelligence and machine learning, are saviors in that sense, and this data is being processed by AI and ML. So basically the argument which this article is making, and is a very standard known concept, which is that the new horizon in the healthcare sector, is AI plus ML plus genomics. If we are able to break the issue of big data, if AI and ML are properly trained to understand this data and sequence it, there are multiple predictive models which can even predict before birth what are the diseases which the child can have. And that ways, big data, ML and AI along with genomic sequencing is the future. And this article basically is not a one which gives you a solution, it gives you a certain picture, and the picture is we in India are quite cognizant of this new horizon, and that is why we are working on genomic sequencing at a break-even speed as of right now. Now this is a question which is based on the same concept. The new horizon of healthcare sector is the integration of AI, machine learning and genomic sequence. Do you agree? Now you can't answer this question if you have no idea about the consortiums, if you have no idea about how TB in cancer and in rare genetic diseases, what are we trying to do, and wherein AI and machine learning comes through. So in order to write a good answer for this article or for this question itself, you have to create an understanding where you understand the first part, which is what is the issue and what are the different aspects which are being talked about today, and second, at the same point of time, you should be able to integrate it with how AI and machine learning helps. So I hope again this is going to be a fruitful question for you vis-a-vis practicing something like this. This is a representative question for the GS paper 3. With this, let's move to a very interesting case or a very interesting concept which has come through, which is radioactive implants for rhino horns to curb poaching. Ironically, the nation which we are going to refer to has also won the match in the morning, and South Africa has gone to the final of the T20 World Cup. The story also comes out of South Africa. See, rhino poaching and the rhino population in South Africa that way is quite, in the southern African nation, is quite big, 15,000. And the Environment Ministry of South Africa says that close to 500 of these what we call as rhinos, either double horned or single horned, have been killed for their horns, and there's illegal poaching which has risen by 11% year on year between 2022 and 2023. So that ways the rhinos are killed for their horns, and these horns have different purposes, sometimes medicinal for human consumption, sometimes to what we call as a certain sense of luxury item ivory, and that ways rhino horns are in a lot of demand for the illicit ivory trade, and along with that for medicinal purposes in what we call as the practices which are basically not medical but in superstitious practices, rhino horns are used. Now the solution which the South African authorities have found out is a very interesting one, which is that they are now injecting into the horn, by first pacifying the rhino, into the horn radioactive isotopes. And these radioactive isotopes don't do anything to the rhino. However, if the bone is cut, the rhino horn is cut, it becomes useless. Why? Because the radioactivity is so much that it cannot be used for human consumption, and the radioactivity also allows for one major thing, which is detection. This is a Second World War or Cold War politics based idea, wherein a lot of things in the Cold War period were laced with radioactive isotopes for the detection across the world. So what they're doing is, if even after radioactive isotoping, they are basically taking this horn, you can detect it across the world in different airports or different spaces through a basic radioactive, what we call as the meter, which picks up radioactive radiation. The radiation itself is so low that it will not harm the animal, however, can be picked up by a machine. And therefore, this project, as it is called, the rooftop project, rhino isotope project, is something through which they got rooftop project. This project is trying to make sure that from South Africa, if any horn of the rhino or ivory is taken, it will either be useless for human consumption or can be detected if there is illegal poaching. That way, it's a very interesting solution, a solution which was used previously also, but now we're using it in conservation. This is where mitigation and illicit poaching is something which can be curbed. Now, how can you ask you a question in the examination? Though this question will seem easy right now, but in the examination it will become difficult. So you will give the answer to the following question in the chat box, but I hope that this time it is going to be a better, because it's a very easy question. The rooftop project, which was recently in the news, is related to which of the following? Nuclear research, anti-poaching initiative, water conservation, or space research. This is a representative question for the examination. However, as I said, could seem very easy right now because we've just done the topic, but in the exam context, it becomes difficult. So the answer to question number 1, you will quote in the chat box as you did yesterday. Quite encouraging that way. Okay. With this, let's move to Delhi. And somehow it is quite unfortunate that here, back-to-back 2 days, I've been discussing water crises. Yesterday I discussed Maharashtra and the Regur's black soil issue along with the rain shadow concept plus the sugarcane production which is happening in Maharashtra. At the same point of time, Delhi is a different story altogether. Here somehow it is politics plus geography, which basically is messing it up. It's not the temperature or the topography and per se the soil, it is rather the politics which is happening around it. Now let's try to understand what is happening for Delhi. Now when we talk about Delhi's water needs in a way are based on, and drinking water needs, is based on all its neighbors, not immediate ones, but in all directions, which is that Haryana, UP, Punjab, Himachal Pradesh, and Uttarakhand all contribute to the drinking water needs of Delhi, and out of it, 40% of it is met by Haryana through the Yamuna. And for the same reason, there is something called the Upper Yamuna River Board, as it is called UYRB. It's called the Upper Yamuna River Board. It divides the amount of water which has to go to Delhi according to the liability of the upper riparian states. Now, Delhi is generally in a very problematic geography because of just having access to the Yamuna. It is water deficient, has not always been water deficient. It is water deficient, and Delhi is the city of extreme weathers, which is extreme cold, extreme heat wave as of right now. It has a lot of rainfall, also gets a little bit of rainfall in the last phase of the monsoons, erratic that ways, and we'll also get a little bit of rainfall in the winter, so western disturbances, little bit under retreating monsoon, but the October heat as it is called. But the idea is Delhi that ways is geographically handicapped when it comes to water, and it is in a way dependent on its neighbors to be cooperative when it comes to water. Now herein lies the political story, wherein the argument which the Delhi government is giving is that one of the most important canals through which water comes into Delhi is called the Munak Canal. And what the Delhi government is arguing, and a lot of drama is also happening behind it, that is irrelevant to us. The Munak Canal is, the argument is Haryana, because of AAP government, BJP, that is the politics of it. The argument is BJP-led government of Haryana is not releasing the water which should have been released in the Munak Canal. That is why there's a water crisis in multiple sectors of Delhi. Now, Haryana is arguing that it has already pushed whatever the liabilities under the Upper Yamuna River Board in that regard. It also has its own demands, so it cannot release more. Now, the Lieutenant Governor had taken up this issue, and he has also argued, and that is again the long saga of a Lieutenant Governor versus CM tussle in Delhi. He has argued that it is not just Haryana. There are multiple leakages in the Munak Canal, which is based on Delhi government's mandate to maintain it, and it has lack of cleaning, and more than that, most of the water, the argument is, from the Yamuna is being pushed out from the Yamuna through illegal water suppliers and what are called tanker mafias in that sense. So it is not just the fault of Haryana or the other neighboring states, but it is rather a whole gaggle of issues, together with illicit water extraction, to the canal being in a very bad shape to itself, and to also the extreme heat in Delhi in that regard. Now the Delhi government then moved to the Supreme Court, saying that there has to be an intervention and water should be released as quickly as possible. Now, to be very clear, under Article 262 and also the Interstate River Water Disputes Act of 1952, it is very, very clearly given that under Article 262 and the Interstate River Water Dispute Act, the Supreme Court does not have jurisdiction over this issue. When it comes to water, the Supreme Court does not have jurisdiction over river water disputes. It is only tribunals as established under the Interstate River Water Dispute Act that you can actually have any form of dialogue between two states. However, still the Supreme Court gave an order, and it is not an overreach. It just said that there should be an emergency meeting of the Upper Yamuna River Board. The argument was Upper Yamuna River Board needs to meet as quickly as possible, and they need to figure out something. Now, in that, there is again some politics which happened, wherein Himachal Pradesh, a Congress-led government, argued that we will be able to push close to 140 million cubic centimeters of water, and therefore the argument was 140 we will push. However, within the next 7 days, the Himachal Pradesh government and the other commitments were backtracked, saying that we are in a deficit ourselves, we can't push more. And more than that, even if HP is going to push water, it will go through Haryana. So the argument is Haryana government needs to actually cooperate. Now, when this happened, the government again moved towards the Supreme Court, saying that the Himachal Pradesh government is not complying and the Upper Yamuna River Board has basically failed to do anything. Therein, the Supreme Court said that we don't want to get involved in this issue further, as it is beyond our jurisdiction as mandated by Article 262 and the Interstate River Water Dispute Act. And therefore, as of right now, there is a deadlock over this issue where Haryana is not ready to release more water. The basic point is, in all of this, the people are suffering. But Delhi water dispute and Delhi water crisis is more a political tussle than just a geographical one. But the question is, now what? And the answer to that question is, Delhi government and Delhiites just can't rely on politics and states for their water. We have already destroyed the water table of Delhi because of illegal borewells in that regard, and environmentalist association and a very renowned environmentalist has argued that Delhi has to now figure out how they can recycle water, and it has to find green solutions to water. We can't have that old regime where you can argue that that state is not giving me water, that state is not giving me water. That is a very lame argument now. Politics will always happen, but now what is becoming more and more evident that this is going to be part and parcel. Bangalore already we've seen something like this. In Delhi it has also come through. We can't have governments blaming each other whilst people are starving and thirsty. So therefore, very clearly there needs to be a certain action plan which needs to be created by the government, wherein recycling of water, rainwater harvesting, reuse of water, retreating of water needs to be put in. So doing random strikes, hunger strikes, and a lot of drama around this will make no sense. So rather, and the article itself is pointing this out, this is not my opinion, but the article is saying that the politics which is happening behind this with regards to the hunger strike, Atishi and all, that actually has no space and has no real argument behind it. You can do all of that, you can pressurize the upper Yamuna River Board or the states, but that is not the ultimate solution. The long-term solution has to be mitigation of this issue through proper means and proper structures. And therein you can get a question like this where you have to be very balanced. The water crisis in Delhi is a product of politics, ecological factors, and the age-old issue of water sharing in India discussed. In this, you can't blame governments. In this, you can't defend governments. Rather, you have to say that, see, this issue of water sharing is something which is since 1950s itself. This cannot be solved, and politics has no end. And ecological factors make it very difficult for Delhi to get this water, and therefore the solution is retreating, rainwater harvesting, recycling, and water conservation practices and awareness. We can't have my way or the highway approach as quoted by the article, and therefore politics aside, we need concrete solutions. So in this answer, please remember, in UPSC you can't write both extreme type of answers. You have to have a mid path. So you will write a mid path answer in which you are going to give a basic argument which is based on the idea that in Delhi's crisis cannot be solved just by politics or river water disputes. We need concrete solutions on the ground. With this, let's move to the two small articles in that sense. First, what is called as the Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita, BNSS, coming into force, and now next time the FIR is going to not be booked under the article 154 of CRPC, rather section 173 of the BNSS, and Delhi police as of right now is getting training to work under the new regime of BNSS. This, if you remember, this was legislated, or there was a revamping of the IPC, the CRPC, and the Civil Procedural Code to make it more democratic and basically geared for independent India. All of them had colonial origins, and there was a more Indianization of these sections, and therein lies BNSS, and basically the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita being amended, the BNSS coming into force. From 1st July, you will see a new regime under which dummy FIRs are being created and shown to the officers in different parts of India, and specifically for Delhi police. There's a proper training which is going on, and new criminal laws are coming through. We'll see what is the protocol which is going to be followed, but training is happening. For you, what is more important is 1st of July, this is going to come into force. So as a citizen of this country, remember, now you are not going to be governed by CRPC but by the BNSS. So remember this point. This is an ongoing concept, will develop further, but that was important. With this, the last topic, which is a very encouraging thing, which is India's largest leopard safari has opened in Karnataka in Bannerghatta, and this is a very encouraging development because leopards are already having a lot of what is called human interaction, and in Bangalore and the areas around Bannerghatta, it is very common for human leopard conflict in that regard. But a lot of money has been pushed in to create for the ranging leopard, which is called Panthera pardus, has now been created in the Bannerghatta National Park, or what is being quoted as Bannerghatta Biological Park. And the idea is, through this they will create a certain space through which tourism is also going to come and will help the restoration and rehabilitation of the leopards. Now, a simple straightforward question can come in the examination. This is question number 2 for you, and you're going to write the answer for this, and we will check who will get the right answers tomorrow. India's largest leopard safari, which was recently in the news, is situated in which of the following protected areas? It's very easy. So is it Kaziranga, is it Bandhavgarh, is it Bannerghatta, or is it Kanha National Park? Seems to be easy right now, but in the examination will be difficult. So before we end, just a summary of this whole session. As always, remember there are multiple issues which we've discussed: the concept of genome and genomic sequencing, how it is important for TB, cancer, oncology. Thereafter, we've understood the concept of the Delhi water dispute, not the politics of it, but rather the issues behind it and what is the way forward. We've also understood how geo-heritage sites need to be conserved, and there's a need for a mandate behind it. Further, we've understood the concept of RTS, which is rooftop solar power plants or rooftop solar for houses, and the potentiality for that. We've also understood why and how we need to develop a certain protocol for geoheritage in that regard, and the Bannerghatta and the BNSS coming into force. With this, I will see you tomorrow. I hope that you will write the answers to these questions in the chat box. See you tomorrow, and we will discuss the 2 questions first and then move forward. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.